quiet village of Chipping Norton, a wealthy widow, Mrs. Blackwood, dazzles with her emerald necklace, rumoured to be cursed. When she collapses at a grand dinner, dead from poison, suspicion falls on those closest to her: a debt-ridden doctor, a greedy jeweller, and a devoted yet fearful companion. Enter Miss Jane Marple, whose sharp eyes and gentle probing unravel a web of love, greed, and betrayal. As secrets spill and the necklace's deadly truth is revealed, only Miss Marple can unmask the killer before the village's shadows deepen. Will she solve the mystery in time? Chapter 1. The arrival at Chipping Norton. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the village of Chipping Norton, its light filtering through the ancient oaks that lined the narrow lanes. The village, a patchwork of stone cottages and winding hedgerows, lay nestled in a fold of the English countryside, where time seemed to linger like mist in the hollows. Miss Jane Marple, seated by the window of her niece Clara's modest home, observed the scene with her customary acuity. Her knitting needles moved with a rhythmic precision, the soft click-clack a counterpoint to the distant chime of the church bell. Though her hands were busy, her mind was sharper still, attuned to the subtle currents that ran beneath the village's tranquil surface. Clara Ashfield, newly married to Henry, a solicitor of good standing but limited imagination, had invited her aunt to Chipping Norton, with a note of urgency that piqued Miss Marple's curiosity. Clara's letters, usually filled with cheerful domestic trivia, had lately carried an undercurrent of unease. "There's something odd about the village," she had written, "and it all seems to centre on Willow Hall." Miss Marple, never one to resist a puzzle, had packed her modest suitcase and arrived by the midday train, her observant eyes noting the stationmaster's hurried manner and the cluster of villagers whispering by the post office. Clara's parlour was a cosy affair, with chintz curtains and a fire crackling in the grate. Over tea served in delicate china cups, Clara poured out the village's latest preoccupation. Mrs. Lavinia Blackwood, a widow of considerable wealth and enigmatic charm, who had taken up residence at Willow Hall 3 months prior. "She's quite the figure, Aunt Jane," Clara said, her eyes wide. "Beautiful, in a cold sort of way, with hair like polished ebony and a manner that keeps everyone at arm's length. But it's that necklace of hers that everyone talks about." Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, her needles pausing for a moment. "A necklace, you say?" "Oh, yes," Clara continued, leaning forward. "A heavy gold chain with a single emerald, the size of a robin's egg, that she wears day and night. They say it belonged to her late husband, Mr. Reginald Blackwood, who made his fortune in the East. There's a rumour it's cursed, brought from some ancient temple, and anyone who wears it meets a bad end. 2 maids have already left Willow Hall, claiming they saw strange shadows in the corridors at night." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression placid, but her mind alert. "Shadows and curses are the stuff of idle tongues, Clara. But a necklace that commands such attention is worth noting. Who has been close to Mrs. Blackwood since her arrival?" Clara frowned, stirring her tea absently. "Well, there's Dr. Simon Grayson, who calls at Willow Hall almost daily. He says it's for her health. She's delicate, or so he claims. Then there's Mr. Vernon Lyle, a jeweller from London who arrived last week to appraise the necklace. He's staying at the Red Lion Inn and seems awfully interested in her affairs. And Miss Eleanor Price, her companion, who's always at her side, though she's nervous as a cat in a storm. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts already tracing patterns. A doctor with frequent access, a jeweller with an eye for treasure, and a companion whose nerves suggested more than mere devotion. These were threads worth following. "And what of Mrs. Blackwood herself?" she asked. "What do the villagers make of her?" Clara hesitated. They don't know what to make of her Aunt Jane. She's polite but distant, gives generously to the church fund, yet never lingers to chat. Some say she's grieving her husband, who died abroad under mysterious circumstances. Others think she's hiding something. That necklace, it's as if it's part of her, and not in a comforting way. Miss Marple set her cup down, her gaze drifting to the window where a blackbird flitted across the garden. People are often drawn to mystery, Clara, and they weave stories to fill the gaps. But a woman like Mrs. Blackwood, with wealth and a curious relic, is bound to attract more than gossip. I should like to meet her." Clara brightened. "Oh, you will. She's hosting a dinner at Willow Hall tomorrow night, and we're invited. Henry says it's to show off her hospitality, but I think she wants to quiet the rumours. Colonel Bantry and his wife, Dolly, will be there too, and I dare say Dolly will have plenty to say." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes gleaming with the quiet anticipation of one who knows that beneath the surface of every village lies a tangle of secrets waiting to be unravelled. "Then I shall look forward to it," she said, resuming her knitting. "A dinner at Willow Hall sounds most illuminating." Chapter 2. The Dinner at Willow Hall. The evening air carried a chill as Miss Jane Marple, arm in arm with her niece Clara, approached Willow Hall. The grand house loomed against the darkening sky, its gabled roof and tall chimneys silhouetted like sentinels over Chipping Norton. Ivy clung to the stone facade, and the windows glowed with the promise of warmth. Yet there was an air of unease about the place, as if the house itself held its breath. Miss Marple, her shawl drawn close, noted the heavy oak door and the polished brass knocker, details that spoke of wealth and careful maintenance. Her sharp eyes, however, were already searching for less tangible clues. The flicker of a curtain, the hesitancy in a servant's step. Inside, the hall was a vision of opulence. A chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting prisms of light across polished mahogany and Persian rugs. Mrs. Lavinia Blackwood greeted her guests with a smile that was both gracious and impenetrable, her black silk gown accentuating her pale skin, and the emerald necklace that gleamed at her throat, the jewel, set in an intricate gold filigree, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, drawing every eye in the room. Miss Marple, standing quietly beside Clara, observed the widow's poise and the faint tension in her fingers as they brushed the necklace. The dining room was no less splendid, its long table set with gleaming silver and crystal that caught the candlelight. Mrs. Blackwood presided at the head, her presence commanding yet curiously detached. To her right sat Dr. Simon Grayson, a man in his early 40s with a handsome face marred by a perpetual frown, as if he carried a private burden. His dark eyes darted frequently to his hostess, though whether in concern or calculation, Miss Marple could not yet discern. To her left was Mr. Vernon Lyle, the London jeweller, whose sharp features and restless hands suggested a mind ever appraising value. His gaze lingered on the emerald necklace with an intensity that bordered on greed. Miss Eleanor Price, Mrs. Blackwood's companion, sat further down the table, her thin frame almost lost in the high-backed chair. Her pale face and trembling hands betrayed a nervousness that seemed to deepen with every clink of glass or burst of laughter. Colonel Bantry, a robust man with a military bearing and a voice that carried across the room, sat opposite his wife Dolly, whose cheerful chatter filled any pause in conversation. Clara and her husband, Henry Ashfield, completed the party, their presence a quiet counterpoint to the more forceful personalities around them. As the first course, a delicate consommé was served. Colonel Bantry launched into a tale of his days in India, his voice booming. "Reminds me of a ruby I saw in Calcutta, Mrs. Blackwood. Not as fine as that emerald of yours, mind, but it had a story. They said it was plucked from a temple idol's eye, and woe betide the man who wore it." Mrs. Blackwood's laugh was sharp, like the snap of a fan. "Really, Colonel, you mustn't believe such tales. This necklace is merely a keepsake from my late husband's travels. He had an eye for beauty, nothing more." Mr. Lyle leaned forward, his fork poised. A remarkable piece nonetheless. Muggle craftsmanship, I'd wager, from the 17th century. The emerald alone is worth a king's ransom, but the setting, exquisite. Have you had it appraised recently? Mrs. Blackwood's smile tightened. "Not recently, Mr. Lyle. I trust my husband's judgment in such matters." Miss Price dropped her spoon, the clatter drawing every eye. Her cheeks flushed as she murmured an apology, and Dr. Grayson leaned toward her, his voice low and soothing. "Steady, Eleanor. No harm done." Miss Marple, sipping her wine, noted the exchange and the way Miss Price's eyes flickered toward her mistress, a mix of devotion and fear. The conversation turned to village matters. The upcoming church fete, the new vicar's sermon style. But Miss Marple's attention remained on the dynamics at the table. Mrs. Blackwood, for all her charm, seemed to hold her guests at a distance, her responses polished but evasive. Dr. Grayson's attentiveness to his hostess bordered on proprietary, while Mr. Lyle's questions about the necklace carried a persistent edge. Miss Price, meanwhile, seemed on the verge of bolting, her fingers twisting a napkin into knots. As the main course, roast pheasant with a rich Madeira sauce, was cleared, Dolly Bantry, ever the gossip, broached the subject of the necklace's rumoured curse. "They say it brings misfortune, Mrs. Blackwood. 2 maids leaving in a month, and those queer shadows they spoke of. Surely you don't believe such nonsense." Mrs. Blackwood's eyes narrowed, but her tone remained light. "Villagers will talk, Mrs. Bantry. I pay no heed to such stories. My husband cherished this necklace, and I wear it in his memory." Miss Marple, her expression mild, interjected softly. "It is a striking piece. Has it always been in your family, Mrs. Blackwood, or did your husband acquire it abroad?" The widow hesitated, her fingers brushing the emerald. "He purchased it in Delhi, I believe, from a merchant with a taste for the dramatic. Reginald loved its history, though I find such tales tiresome." Before Miss Marple could press further, a sudden change came over Mrs. Blackwood. Her hand flew to her throat, her face paling to a ghostly white. The emerald seemed to glow against her skin as she gasped, her voice a ragged whisper. "My necklace, it burns!" Her eyes widened, and she swayed in her chair, clutching the tablecloth. Dr. Grayson was at her side in an instant, his medical bag already in hand. "Breathe, Lavinia," he urged, loosening her collar. The other guests rose, their voices a clamour of concern. But Miss Marple remained seated, her keen eyes fixed on the scene. She noted the faint redness around Mrs. Blackwood's throat, where the necklace had rested, and the way her fingers trembled as they grasped the jewel. Dr. Grayson pronounced it a fainting spell, likely from the heat of the room, and called for a servant to fetch water. As Mrs. Blackwood was helped to a sofa, her breathing shallow but steady, the dinner dissolved into chaos. Colonel Bantry blustered about the need for fresh air, while Dolly fanned herself and whispered about curses. Mr. Lyle hovered near the necklace, his eyes gleaming, until a sharp glance from Miss Marple made him step back. Miss Price, pale as death, clung to the arm of a chair, her eyes darting between her mistress and the door. Miss Marple, her knitting untouched in her lap, observed it all. The necklace, the widow's collapse, the undercurrents of fear and greed. She sensed a pattern forming, though its shape was not yet clear. As the guests dispersed, Clara whispered, "Aunt Jane, do you think it's the curse?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. "My dear Clara, curses are the inventions of those who wish to explain what they cannot understand. But something is amiss here, and I intend to find out what." With the evening's drama unresolved, Miss Marple retired to Clara's cottage, her mind already piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. The necklace, with its sinister beauty, was at the heart of it, and she suspected that the truth, like the emerald itself, lay hidden beneath a polished surface. Chapter 3. The Poisoned Clue. The morning after the ill-fated dinner at Willow Hall dawned grey and heavy, with clouds hanging low over Chipping Norton. Miss Jane Marple, seated at Clara's breakfast table, stirred her tea absently, her thoughts far from the toast and marmalade before her. The image of Mrs. Blackwood's collapse, the sudden gasp, the hand clutching the emerald necklace, the faint redness on her throat, lingered in her mind. Clara, still shaken, recounted the villagers' reaction over breakfast. "They're saying it's the curse, Aunt Jane," she said, her voice low. "The baker's wife swears the necklace is possessed." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with quiet amusement. "My dear Clara, a village will always find a curse to explain the inexplicable. But I suspect there is a more human hand at work here." She set her cup down and rose, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. "I think a visit to Willow Hall is in order. Condolences must be offered after all." By mid-morning, the news had spread. Mrs. Lavinia Blackwood was dead. Dr. Grayson, summoned in the early hours, had pronounced it heart failure, citing her delicate constitution. The village buzzed with speculation, but Miss Marple, walking the short distance to Willow Hall with Clara, was sceptical. Heart failure was a convenient explanation, often used when answers were scarce or unwanted. Her mind turned to the necklace, its gleaming emerald, and the curious residues she had glimpsed on its gold chain during the dinner's chaos. At Willow Hall, the air was thick with grief and unease. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dobbs, a stout woman with red-rimmed eyes, ushered them into the drawing-room. Miss Eleanor Price sat huddled in a corner, her face pale and her hands twisting a damp handkerchief. "It's too dreadful," she whispered as Miss Marple offered her sympathies. "She was so alive last night, and now gone." Miss Marple's gentle questions drew out fragments of the night's events. Miss Price revealed that Mrs. Blackwood had complained of a burning sensation around her throat in the days leading up to the dinner. dismissing it as irritation from the necklace's clasp. "She wouldn't take it off," Miss Price said, her voice trembling. "She said it was her duty to her husband's memory." With Mrs. Dobbs's permission, Miss Marple examined the necklace, now locked in a glass case in the study. The emerald gleamed under the morning light, but it was the gold chain that held her attention. A faint powdery residue clung to its links, almost imperceptible. She recalled a similar case in St. Mary Mead, where a gardener's rash had been traced to a toxic plant. Could this be something similar, but far more sinister? Miss Marple turned to Clara. "I should like to speak with Inspector Craddock. He's a sensible man and will understand the need for discretion." Clara, accustomed to her aunt's methods, nodded and sent a message to the local police station. Inspector Craddock, a tall man with a no-nonsense demeanour, arrived promptly, his notebook at the ready. Miss Marple explained her suspicions about the necklace, suggesting a sample of the residue be sent to a chemist in London. "It may be nothing," she said, her tone mild, "but it's best to be thorough." The inspector, who had worked with Miss Marple before, agreed without hesitation. A small scraping of the residue was carefully collected and dispatched to her friend, Mr. Hargreaves, a chemist with a knack for uncovering the obscure. While they waited for his report, Miss Marple spoke with Mrs. Dobbs, who had served at Willow Hall for a decade. "Did Mrs. Blackwood have any enemies?" she asked, her voice soft as she folded her hands in her lap. Mrs. Dobbs hesitated, then shook her head. "None that I know of, miss. She kept to herself mostly, but Mr. Lyle, the jeweller, was always asking about that necklace. Made her uncomfortable, I think. And Miss Price, well, she was devoted, but sometimes she'd look at the mistress with such a queer expression, like she was afraid of her own shadow." Miss Marple nodded, filing away the housekeeper's words. The chemist's report arrived by the afternoon post, and Inspector Craddock shared the findings with her in Clara's parlour. The residue contained aconite, a rare and deadly poison that could be absorbed through the skin, causing symptoms from irritation to fatal collapse. "It's not something you'd find lying about," Craddock said, his brow furrowed. "Someone had to put it there, deliberately." Miss Marple's mind raced. Aconite was subtle, its effects easily mistaken for natural causes, especially in a woman known to be frail. The necklace, worn constantly, was the perfect vehicle for such a poison. But who had the opportunity and the motive to tamper with it? Dr. Grayson, with his medical knowledge and access to poisons. Mr. Lyle, whose interest in the necklace seemed to exceed professional curiosity. Or Miss Price, whose nervous devotion might hide a darker intent. She decided to begin with the household. Returning to Willow Hall, she spoke again with Miss Price, who was now openly distraught. "Did Mrs. Blackwood ever lend the necklace to anyone, or leave it unattended?" Miss Marple asked, her tone as soothing as a lullaby. Miss Price shook her head vehemently. "Never. She kept it locked when she wasn't wearing it, and only I had the key to the case. She trusted me completely." Her eyes filled with tears, but Miss Marple noted a flicker of something else. Guilt, perhaps, or fear of discovery. As they left Willow Hall, Miss Marple walked slowly, her thoughts turning to the dinner. The redness on Mrs. Blackwood's throat had appeared suddenly, suggesting the poison had been applied recently. The guests, the servants, even the act of serving dinner, any could have provided an opportunity. but the precision of the act pointed to someone with both access and knowledge. Back at Clara's cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire. Her knitting resumed, but her mind elsewhere. "It's a clever crime, Clara," she said softly. "The necklace was a weapon hidden in plain sight. Whoever did this knew Mrs. Blackwood's habits and used them against her." She paused, her needles clicking. "I think it's time we learned more about those closest to her. Dr. Grayson, Mr. Lyle, and Miss Price. They each have a story, and I suspect one of them holds the key." Clara shivered, despite the fire's warmth. "You make it sound so simple, Aunt Jane. But how will you know who it is?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp. "By listening, my dear, and watching. People reveal themselves in the smallest ways. A glance, a hesitation, a word too carefully chosen. The truth is there, if one knows where to look." Chapter 4. The Jeweller's Secret. The morning mist clung to the hedgerows of Chipping Norton, lending the village an air of secrecy that matched Miss Jane Marple's mood as she sat in Clara's parlour. Her knitting lay idle in her lap, a rare occurrence, as she pondered the chemist's report on the aconite-laced necklace. The poison was no accident, and its deliberate application pointed to someone with both opportunity and intent. Her thoughts turned to Mr. Vernon Lyle, the London jeweller whose sharp eyes had lingered on Mrs. Blackwood's emerald, with an intensity that spoke of more than professional interest. There was something in his manner, a guarded eagerness, that warranted closer scrutiny. Miss Marple decided a direct approach would serve best. She sent a note to the Red Lion Inn, where Mr. Lyle was staying, inviting him to tea at Clara's cottage that afternoon. "A little hospitality disarms even the wariest," she remarked to Clara, who was bustling about with a tray of scones. "And Mr. Lyle, I suspect, has a story he's not eager to share." At precisely 3 o'clock, Mr. Lyle arrived, his tailored suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to the village's rustic charm. He was a lean man in his 50s, with a hawkish face and quick, assessing eyes that darted about the parlour as if appraising its modest contents. Miss Marple greeted him warmly, her gentle demeanour belying the keen observation behind her spectacles. "So kind of you to come, Mr. Lyle," she said, pouring tea into a delicate cup. "I've been curious about your work. A jeweller's life must be full of fascinating tales." Mr. Lyle accepted the tea with a thin smile, his fingers tapping the saucer. "It has its moments, Miss Marple. Gems like Mrs. Blackwood's emerald are rare, and they carry stories, sometimes more than their owners know." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite interest. "That necklace was quite striking. You seemed particularly taken with it at the dinner. Have you seen its like before?" A flicker of unease crossed Mr. Lyle's face, quickly masked by a sip of tea. He set the cup down and leaned back, his tone measured. "As a matter of fact, I have. Some years ago, I appraised a piece much like it, a Muggle emerald set in gold, stolen from a private collection in London. The thief was never caught, and the necklace vanished. When I saw Mrs. Blackwood's, I couldn't help but wonder if it was the same." Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her voice remained soft. "How extraordinary! Did you share your suspicions with her?" Mr. Lyle shifted in his chair, his fingers smoothing an invisible crease in his trousers. "I intended to, privately. I needed to examine the necklace more closely to be certain. But with her passing, that opportunity is gone, and the necklace is locked away." There was a note of frustration in his voice, and Miss Marple noted it. "It must be disappointing," she said, offering a scone. "A piece like that would be a feather in any jeweller's cap. Did you hope to acquire it?" Mr. Lyle's smile was tight. "My interest was professional, Miss Marple. A jewel of that provenance could fetch a fortune at auction, but I'd have advised Mrs. Blackwood to insure it properly first. Its history is complicated." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning over his words. Complicated, indeed. A stolen necklace resurfacing in Chipping Norton suggested motives beyond mere profit. Had Lyle recognized the emerald and sought to reclaim it, perhaps by illicit means? The aconite on the chain could have been a desperate measure to force Mrs. Blackwood to part with it, or to eliminate her if she refused. Yet his demeanour, while guarded, lacked the cold calculation of a murderer. Greed, she thought, was his vice, but was it enough to kill? As Mr. Lyle spoke of his travels, Miss Marple steered the conversation to Willow Hall. "You must have spent some time there, appraising the necklace. Did you notice anything unusual about the household? Miss Price, for instance, seemed quite devoted to her mistress." Mr. Lyle's eyes narrowed slightly. "Devoted? Yes, but jumpy. She hovered over Mrs. Blackwood like a mother hen, always watching the necklace. I wondered if she was afraid someone might take it, or if she wanted it herself." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of mild curiosity. "And Dr. Grayson? He seemed attentive to Mrs. Blackwood's health." Mr. Lyle snorted softly. "Attentive or opportunistic? Doctors in small villages don't often get patients with her wealth. He was always there, fussing over her. I saw him handle the necklace once, adjusting it when she complained of discomfort. Seemed a bit too familiar, if you ask me." This was new information, and Miss Marple tucked it away. Had Dr. Grayson's hands, so quick to soothe, applied the poison instead? She thanked Mr. Lyle for his time, her smile as disarming as ever. As he left, she noted the slight haste in his step, as if he were eager to escape her gentle probing. Alone with Clara, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the needles clicking rhythmically. "Mr. Lyle is a man with an eye for opportunity," she said thoughtfully. "He wanted that necklace, perhaps to restore his reputation or to profit from its sale. But poison is a subtle weapon, and he strikes me as a man who prefers direct methods." Clara frowned, setting out fresh cups. "Then you don't think he did it?" "I think he knows more than he says," Miss Marple replied. "His story about the stolen necklace is plausible, but it raises questions. If it was stolen, how did it come to Mrs. Blackwood? And why would someone poison her to reclaim it, when theft would be simpler?" Clara shivered. "It's all so grim, Aunt Jane. That necklace, it's like it casts a shadow over everyone." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was sharp. "Shadows are cast by light, Clara, and the light here is the truth. We must follow it, wherever it leads." As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple considered her next step. Mr. Lyle's revelation about the necklace's possible history suggested a motive rooted in the past, but the poison pointed to a present danger. Dr. Grayson's familiarity with the necklace and Miss Price's nervous devotion were threads in the same tapestry. She resolved to visit the doctor next, to test his story against the growing pattern in her mind. The aconite, the emerald, the secrets of Willow Hall, they were all connected, and Miss Marple was determined to unravel them. Chapter 5. The Doctor's Motive. The clock in Clara's parlour chimed softly as Miss Jane Marple folded her knitting and set it aside, her thoughts fixed on Dr. Simon Grayson. The doctor's frequent visits to Willow Hall, his proprietary manner with Mrs. Blackwood, and Mr. Lyle's observation of him handling the necklace had woven a thread of suspicion in her mind. Aconite, the poison identified on the emerald necklace, was not a substance one stumbled upon by chance. It required knowledge and access, both of which a doctor possessed. Miss Marple decided a visit to the village surgery was in order, and she donned her coat with the quiet determination of one accustomed to unravelling human tangles. The surgery was a modest building on the edge of Chipping Norton, its whitewashed walls and neatly trimmed garden giving an impression of order. Inside, the waiting room was empty, save for an elderly woman leafing through a magazine, her cough punctuating the silence. Miss Marple, with the pretext of a minor ailment, a slight stiffness in her wrist she claimed, secured an appointment with Dr. Grayson. As she waited, she observed the orderly shelves of medical books and the locked cabinet behind the receptionist's desk, its glass front revealing rows of vials and bottles. Dr. Grayson greeted her with a professional smile, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of strain. He was a man of medium build, his dark hair touched with grey at the temples, and his hands, as he examined Miss Marple's wrist, trembled ever so slightly. "Nothing serious, Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth but tired. "A bit of rest should do the trick." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle gratitude. "You're very kind, Doctor. It must be trying, managing so many patients, especially with the sad business at Willow Hall. You were close to Mrs. Blackwood, I understand." Dr. Grayson's smile faltered, and he busied himself with a notepad. "I was her physician, yes. She had a delicate constitution, heart trouble, you know. I visited often to ensure her comfort." "Very devoted of you," Miss Marple said, her tone mild. "And that necklace of hers, so striking. Did you ever examine it closely? I heard she complained of irritation from it." The doctor's pen paused, and he met her gaze briefly before looking away. "She mentioned a slight discomfort once or twice. I advised her to remove it occasionally, but she was attached to it. A sentimental piece, she said." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on his face, noting the faint flush creeping up his neck. "Sentimental, indeed. It's curious how such a beautiful thing could cause discomfort, almost as if it carried more than sentiment." Dr. Grayson cleared his throat, rising to signal the end of the consultation. "I'm afraid I have another patient waiting, Miss Marple. Do rest that wrist." As she left the surgery, Miss Marple's suspicions deepened. The doctor's unease, coupled with his access to medical supplies, made him a compelling figure in the mystery. She recalled Clara's mention of his financial troubles, rumours of debts that threatened his practice. A wealthy patient like Mrs. Blackwood could have been a lifeline, or perhaps a temptation too great to resist. With Inspector Craddock's assistance, Miss Marple arranged to examine the doctor's records. The inspector, though initially sceptical, trusted her instincts and accompanied her, back to the surgery after hours. The locked cabinet yielded to a key provided by the receptionist, who was eager to assist the law. Among the vials, Miss Marple found a small bottle labelled Aconitum napellus, its contents partially used. Dr. Grayson, when questioned, explained it was prescribed for a patient with a rare heart condition, but the patient had moved away months ago, leaving the vial untouched since. "It's a dangerous substance, Inspector," Miss Marple said softly, holding the vial to the light. "And yet here it is, in a surgery frequented by a woman poisoned by the same." Craddock's brow furrowed. "You think Grayson applied it to the necklace? But why? He'd risk his reputation, his livelihood." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. "People take risks for many reasons, Inspector. Money, fear, even love. Dr. Grayson's visits to Willow Hall were frequent, and his manner with Mrs. Blackwood was more than professional. Perhaps he saw a way to secure her wealth, or to free himself from her demands." Back at Clara's cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resumed but her mind elsewhere. Clara, pouring tea, voiced her confusion. But Aunt Jane, if Dr. Grayson poisoned her, why do it so publicly? Everyone saw her collapse at the dinner. "Exactly, my dear," Miss Marple replied, her needles clicking. "A public death deflects suspicion. Heart failure is a tidy explanation, and who would question a doctor's diagnosis? But the aconite was applied with care over time to mimic a natural decline. Whoever did this knew her habits intimately." Clara shivered. "It's so cold-blooded. Do you think he was in love with her, or after her money?" Miss Marple's eyes softened. "Both are possible, Clara. A man in debt might see a wealthy widow as a solution, but a man in love might act out of desperation if his affections were threatened. We must learn more about his relationship with Mrs. Blackwood." To that end, Miss Marple spoke with Dolly Bantry, whose gossip was a treasure trove of village secrets. Over tea at the Bantrys' home, Dolly revealed that Dr. Grayson had been seen leaving Willow Hall late at night on several occasions, long after a routine medical call. "It caused quite a stir," Dolly said, her eyes gleaming. "Some thought he was smitten, others that he was after her fortune. Mrs. Blackwood was charming, but she could be demanding, always calling him for the smallest ailment." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving connections. A doctor in debt, with access to poison and a close connection to the victim, was a strong suspect. Yet something in his manner, the tremor in his hands, the strain in his eyes, suggested fear as much as guilt. Was he a perpetrator, or a man caught in a web not of his making? As evening fell, Miss Marple walked the quiet lanes of Chipping Norton, her thoughts turning to the necklace itself. Its constant presence on Mrs. Blackwood's throat suggested a routine that the poisoner had exploited. Dr. Grayson had the means and opportunity, but motive remained elusive. She resolved to probe further, perhaps by speaking with Miss Price again, whose nervous devotion might hold another piece of the puzzle. The truth, she knew, lay in the small details, the glance, the hesitation, the unguarded moment, and she was determined to find it. Chapter 6. The Companion's Fear. The soft drizzle that greeted Chipping Norton the following morning did little to dampen Miss Jane Marple's resolve. Seated at Clara's dining table, she sipped her tea and contemplated the threads of the mystery surrounding Mrs. Blackwood's death. The aconite on the necklace pointed to a deliberate act, and while Dr. Grayson's access to the poison and Mr. Lyle's fixation on the emerald were compelling, Miss Marple's thoughts kept circling back to Miss Eleanor Price. The companion's nervous demeanour, her trembling hands at the dinner, and her intense devotion to her mistress suggested a complexity that warranted closer examination. There was fear in her eyes, Miss Marple recalled, and fear often hid secrets. Determined to probe deeper, Miss Marple proposed a walk with Miss Price, suggesting the fresh air might do her good. Clara, ever eager to assist, arranged the meeting through a note, and by noon, Miss Marple found herself strolling along the wooded path that bordered Willow Hall's grounds. Miss Price, bundled in a drab coat, walked with her head bowed, her steps hesitant as if she feared the ground might betray her. The rain had eased, leaving the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine. Miss Marple, her umbrella tucked under her arm, began with gentle pleasantries. "You must miss Mrs. Blackwood terribly," she said, her voice soft as a caress. "You were with her for some time, I understand." Miss Price nodded, her eyes fixed on the path. 3 years, Miss Marple. She was everything to me. So kind, so generous. I don't know what I'll do now." There was a catch in her voice, and Miss Marple noted it, her expression one of quiet sympathy. "It's hard to lose someone so close. She must have trusted you deeply to keep you by her side." Miss Price's hands twisted together, her knuckles white. "She did. I managed her correspondence, her appointments, even the necklace. She never let anyone else touch it except me." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened behind her spectacles, though her tone remained mild. "That necklace was quite extraordinary. Did she ever speak of its history, or why she wore it so constantly?" A shadow crossed Miss Price's face, and she glanced nervously at the trees, as if expecting an eavesdropper. "She said it was a gift from Mr. Blackwood before he died. She felt it protected her in a way, but lately she was afraid. She told me someone was watching her, always watching." Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice gentle, but probing. "Watching her? Did she say who?" Miss Price hesitated, her breath catching. "No, not exactly, but she was uneasy about Mr. Lyle. He kept pressing her to sell the necklace, saying it was too valuable to keep in a village like this. And Dr. Grayson, she thought he was too attentive, always checking her pulse, asking about her health. She wondered if he knew something she didn't." This was new, and Miss Marple tucked it away, her mind turning over the implications. "It must have been distressing for her," she said, "and for you, being so close. Did you ever notice anything unusual about the necklace itself? Perhaps when you cleaned it, or locked it away?" Miss Price stopped walking, her eyes wide with sudden panic. I cleaned it regularly, as she asked. Just with a soft cloth, nothing more. I swear, I never did anything to harm her." Her voice rose, and she clapped a hand over her mouth, as if realizing she had said too much. Miss Marple placed a reassuring hand on her arm, her touch light but steady. "My dear, no one is accusing you, but you were in a position to see things others might have missed. Did anyone else handle the necklace, even briefly?" Miss Price shook her head, tears brimming. "Only Dr. Grayson, once, when it irritated her skin. He adjusted the clasp, said it might be too tight. And Mr. Lyle, he looked at it closely during his appraisal, but I was there the whole time. I never left it unattended." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The companion's fear was palpable, but was it the fear of guilt, or of something else? The mention of Dr. Grayson handling the necklace aligned with Mr. Lyle's observation, strengthening the case against the doctor. Yet Miss Price's agitation suggested she knew more than she was saying, perhaps something she herself did not fully understand. As they resumed their walk, Miss Marple steered the conversation to lighter matters, asking about Miss Price's plans now that her employer was gone. The young woman's answers were vague, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. By the time they parted at the gate of Willow Hall, Miss Marple was convinced that Miss Price was a key to the puzzle, though whether as perpetrator or pawn remained unclear. Back at Clara's cottage, Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting in hand but untouched. Clara, sensing her aunt's preoccupation, ventured a question. "Did you learn anything from Miss Price, Aunt Jane? She seems so fragile. I can't imagine her harming anyone." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Fragility can mask strength, Clara, just as devotion can hide desperation. Miss Price loved Mrs. Blackwood, but love can twist into something darker when fear or loss takes hold. She spoke of Mrs. Blackwood's suspicions, someone watching her, someone she didn't trust. That tells me the poisoner was close, someone within her circle." Clara frowned, setting down her embroidery. "But who? Dr. Grayson, with his medicines? Mr. Lyle, with his talk of stolen jewels?" "Both are possible," Miss Marple replied, her needles beginning to move at last. "But Miss Price's fear is telling. She knows something, perhaps without realizing its significance. The necklace was her responsibility, and yet it became a weapon. I wonder if she suspects herself, or fears someone else's guilt." As evening settled over Chipping Norton, Miss Marple considered her next move. The pieces were falling into place. Dr. Grayson's debts and access to aconite, Mr. Lyle's obsession with the necklace's history, and Miss Price's nervous devotion. Each had a motive, each had opportunity, but the truth lay in the interplay of their actions. She decided to consult Inspector Craddock again to see if any new evidence had surfaced at Willow Hall. The companion's fear, she sensed, was the thread that would unravel the knot, and she was determined to follow it to its end. Chapter 7. The Unravelling. The evening sky over Chipping Norton was a deep indigo, punctuated by the first stars, as Miss Jane Marple stood in the drawing-room of Willow Hall. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and fading roses, and the gathered guests, Dr. Simon Grayson, Mr. Vernon Lyle, Miss Eleanor Price, Colonel and Mrs. Bantry, Clara and Henry Ashfield, sat in uneasy silence. Inspector Craddock, at Miss Marple's request, had arranged this gathering, his presence by the fireplace lending an air of authority. The emerald necklace, now locked in its glass case, gleamed ominously under the chandelier's light, a silent witness to the tragedy that had unfolded. Miss Marple, her knitting tucked in her bag, faced the room, with a calm that belied the gravity of her purpose. "My dear friends," she began, her voice soft but clear, "we are here to address the sad matter of Mrs. Blackwood's death. It was no accident, nor was it the work of a curse, as some have whispered. The necklace she wore, so cherished, was tainted with aconite, a poison that killed her slowly, its effects mistaken for heart failure." A murmur rippled through the room. Dr. Grayson's face tightened. Mr. Lyle's eyes darted to the necklace, and Miss Price let out a stifled sob. Miss Marple raised a hand, her gaze steady. "The question is not only who applied the poison, but why. Let us consider the facts." She turned to Dr. Grayson, who sat rigid in his chair. "Dr. Grayson, you were Mrs. Blackwood's physician, visiting her often. You had access to aconite, found in your surgery, and your debts are no secret in the village. A wealthy patient might have seemed a solution to your troubles, but a public death by poison would risk your reputation. Your care for her was evident, but was it purely professional? Dr. Grayson's jaw clenched, but his voice was steady. I cared for Lavinia as a patient, nothing more. The aconite was for a former patient, as I explained. I had no reason to harm her. Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable, and turned to Mr. Lyle. Mr. Lyle, your interest in the necklace was clear from the start. You believed it to be a stolen Muggle piece, a prize that could restore your standing in the jewellery trade. You pressed Mrs. Blackwood to sell it, but she refused. Poison is a subtle method, yet your ambition seems to favour bolder moves, such as theft. Did you hope to force her hand? Mr. Lyle's face flushed, his fingers gripping the armrest. I wanted the necklace, yes, but not her death. I needed to verify its provenance, that's all. I'm no murderer. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on him before moving to Miss Price, who was trembling, her handkerchief a crumpled mass in her hands. Miss Price, you were closest to Mrs. Blackwood, managing her daily affairs, including the necklace. You cleaned it, locked it away, and held its key. You spoke of her fear, of someone watching her, but your own fear is telling. You loved her, perhaps too much, and feared losing her, or what she represented. Miss Price's eyes widened, tears spilling over. I loved her, yes, but I'd never hurt her. She was my world. I only wanted to protect her. Miss Marple stepped closer to the glass case, her voice gentle but unrelenting. The necklace was poisoned with aconite, applied to the chain where it touched her skin. It required someone who knew her habits, who could act without suspicion. Dr. Grayson had the means, Mr. Lyle the motive, but you, Miss Price, had both opportunity and a deeper reason. The room stilled, all eyes on the trembling companion. Miss Marple continued, her tone as calm as if discussing the weather. Mrs. Blackwood was planning to sell the necklace, wasn't she? Mr. Lyle's persistence worried her, and she confided in you. But you saw it as a betrayal, not of her husband's memory, but of you. The necklace was her bond to you, a symbol of your place in her life. If she sold it, you feared she might dismiss you, or worse, leave you behind. Miss Price's sob broke the silence, her voice a whisper. She was going to send me away. She said I was too dependent, that I needed to find my own path. I couldn't bear it. The necklace, it was all I had left of her. Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her words were firm. So, you coated the chain with aconite, taken from Dr. Grayson's surgery during one of your many errands there. You knew it would work slowly, mimicking her heart trouble, and no one would suspect you, the devoted companion. But your fear gave you away, your trembling hands, your panic when she collapsed. You didn't mean for it to go so far, did you? Miss Price collapsed into her chair, her confession spilling out in a torrent. I only wanted to make her ill, to keep her with me. I thought if she was weak, she'd need me more. I didn't know it would kill her. I loved her, I swear. Her sobs filled the room, and Inspector Craddock stepped forward, his expression grim as he signalled a constable to assist her. Dr. Grayson exhaled, his shoulders sagging, while Mr. Lyle stared at the necklace, his greed tempered by the weight of the truth. Colonel Bantry muttered something about damned foolishness, and Dolly clutched her husband's arm, her gossip silenced for once. Clara, wide-eyed, looked at her aunt with awe. Miss Marple stepped back, her work done. Love can be as dangerous as greed, she said quietly to Inspector Craddock. Miss Price's devotion turned to desperation, and she used the necklace as her weapon, not realizing its full power. As Miss Price was led away, the room emptied, leaving only the necklace in its case, its emerald gleaming coldly. Miss Marple glanced at it, her thoughts already turning to the simplicity of human motives, love, fear, loss, and how they could twist into tragedy. With a final nod to Craddock, she took Clara's arm, ready to return to the quiet of the cottage, where the world, for a moment, might seem less shadowed. Chapter 8. The quiet return. The morning sun broke through the lingering mist over Chipping Norton, casting a soft light on the village's stone cottages and winding lanes. Miss Jane Marple sat at Clara's breakfast table, her suitcase neatly packed by the door, ready for her return to St. Mary Mead. The events of the previous evening at Willow Hall, the unravelling of Miss Price's tragic crime, had left the village subdued, its usual chatter replaced by a hushed reverence for the truth laid bare. Clara, pouring tea with a touch more care than usual, glanced at her aunt with a mixture of awe and unease. "It's hard to believe it's over, Aunt Jane," she said, setting the teapot down. "Poor Miss Price. To think her love drove her to such a dreadful act." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, softened as she took a sip of tea. "Love, Clara, is a powerful force, but it can twist into something dark when mixed with fear or obsession. Miss Price saw Mrs. Blackwood as her anchor, and the thought of losing her was more than she could bear. It's a sad tale, but not an uncommon one." Clara shivered, stirring her tea absently. "You saw it all so clearly. Dr. Grayson's debts, Mr. Lyle's greed, Miss Price's fear. How do you do it, Aunt Jane? It's as if you see straight into people's hearts." Miss Marple smiled, her knitting needles clicking softly as she resumed her work. "It's not so mysterious, my dear. People are much the same, whether in Chipping Norton or St. Mary Mead. They act from the same motives, love, greed, fear, and they reveal themselves in the smallest ways. A glance, a hesitation, a word out of place. One only needs to watch and listen." The village, though shaken, was already returning to its rhythm. The church bells rang for morning service, and the postman made his rounds, pausing to exchange solemn nods with passers-by. Willow Hall, now empty of dead, its mistress, stood silent, its grandeur dimmed by the tragedy within. The emerald necklace, stripped of its deadly secret, had been sent to London for safekeeping, pending the settlement of Mrs. Blackwood's estate. Miss Marple, reflecting on its sinister beauty, wondered briefly about its history. The stolen Muggle treasure Mr. Lyle had mentioned, but such questions were for others to pursue. Her work here was done. As Clara helped her aunt with her coat, she ventured a question. "Do you think Miss Price will ever forgive herself? She seemed so broken last night." Miss Marple paused, her hand on the doorframe. "Guilt is a heavy burden, Clara, but confession can lighten it. Miss Price acted out of desperation, not malice. She will carry the weight of her actions, but time and remorse may bring her some peace." They stepped outside, the crisp air carrying the scent of damp leaves. Henry Ashfield, ever punctual, waited with the car to drive Miss Marple to the station. As they passed the village green, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the familiar sights. The bakery, the post office, the children playing near the church. Each held its own small dramas, she knew, but none quite so deadly as the one she had just resolved. At the station, Clara hugged her tightly. You've saved us from a shadow, Aunt Jane. I don't know how we'd have managed without you." Miss Marple patted her niece's cheek, her smile warm but tinged with mischief. "You'd have managed, my dear, but perhaps with a few more rumours of curses. Now, take care of Henry and write to me about the church fete. I expect a full report." As the train pulled away, Miss Marple settled into her seat, her knitting bag at her side. The countryside rolled past, a blur of green and gold, and her thoughts drifted to the patterns of human nature she had observed. Miss Price's devotion, Dr. Grayson's desperation, Mr. Lyle's ambition, they were all threads in a tapestry she had seen before, in different forms, in different places. The necklace, with its poisoned chain, was merely the instrument of a deeper truth, that the heart's desires, unchecked, could lead to ruin. She opened her bag, pulling out her knitting, and her needles began their familiar dance. The rhythm soothed her as it always did, and she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Chipping Norton would heal, as villages do, and she would return to St. Mary Mead, where no doubt another puzzle awaited. For Miss Marple knew, with the certainty of long experience, that wherever people gathered there would be secrets, and she would be ready to unravel them.